The dining room felt warmer than usual, though the thermostat hadn't moved. My mother's Victorian chandelier cast a soft golden light over the table, but nothing about the evening felt gentle. Forks scraped porcelain in slow, deliberate motions. My brother focused on cutting his steak into uniform cubes, never once looking up, across from me. My sister scrolled idly on her phone between sips of wine, her thumb moving in tiny, controlled arcs. My mother's smile was the same one she wore for church fundraisers, polished, unwavering, just a little too bright. Every time her gaze landed on me, it lingered a second too long before moving to the next person, at the head of the table. My stepfather chewed methodically, saying nothing, his eyes fixed somewhere between his plate and me. Halfway through the main course, my phone buzzed softly against my thigh. I glanced down, angling the screen under the tablecloth. A text from an unknown number. "Don't react. They're recording you." The words punched the air from my lungs. I kept my posture steady, lifted my glass, and took a slow sip of water to buy a few seconds. The smell of rosemary from the roast chicken suddenly seemed too sharp, the air heavier. I let my gaze drift around the table, careful not to lock eyes with anyone. The decorative vase on the sideboard, something new, a tall, narrow piece with a wide mouth, was angled directly toward my seat. My sister's phone, tilted just enough that its camera could be aimed my way, remained in her hand. My stepfather's gaze, though blank, never wavered. I pressed my napkin to my lips, nodding at something my mother had said, though I hadn't heard a word. The pulse in my neck thudded louder than the clink of cutlery. Whoever had sent the message was here, in this house, watching the same things I was, and for some reason, they didn't want me to tip off the others. I placed my glass back on the table and steadied my breathing, my fingers curling around the edge of my chair as the evening carried on like nothing had changed. I kept my fork moving, tasting nothing. Nodding at conversation I wasn't really hearing. Every movement was deliberate calm, slow, steady, inside. My mind replayed the last few weeks like a reel I couldn't pause. The armchair in my bedroom had been moved a few inches toward the window. A brand new smoke detector appeared above my bed, even though the old one had worked fine. And just last Thursday, Landon had mentioned casually, "Grandma's been checking my room a lot. She says she's making sure it's clean." The details I'd brushed off now stacked neatly into something darker when dinner finally wound down. I helped clear the table, chatting about the weather, my schedule, anything that sounded harmless. Then I excused myself, saying I needed to grab a book from the den. My steps down the hallway were light, my heartbeat anything but. The bookshelf loomed against the far wall, crowded with my mother's hardcovers, most of them untouched in years. I ran my fingers along the spines until I reached one that sat slightly forward, a thick volume of American landmarks. I pulled it out and felt the weight too light. Inside was a hollow compartment, snugly holding a tiny black device no bigger than a matchbox. A pinhole lens winked back at me. I clicked it off with shaking fingers and slipped it into my pocket. My palms were damp, my throat dry, but I didn't let myself pause. If this was what the text warned about, I had to be sure it wasn't the only one. Beside the device, a small slot held a micro SD card. I slid it out, tucking it into the lining of my coat before returning the hollow book to its place exactly as I'd found it. I straightened, smoothing my hair and stepping back into the hallway, my face set in the same polite mask I'd worn all evening. Tonight was not the night for confrontation. Tonight was for keeping my cards close and waiting to see just how many they thought they'd already played. That night, after tucking Landon into bed, I locked my bedroom door and set my laptop on the desk. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I slid the micro SD card into an adapter, my fingers trembling despite the stillness around me. The first video loaded quickly, a clip of me in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. Halfway through, the footage jumped, cutting to an argument with my sister from weeks ago. The audio was spliced so it sounded like I'd snapped mid-sentence, my voice sharp and unprovoked. I clicked to the next file. Same patterns start with something mundane. Slice in the worst possible moment. Stitch it together into a neat package of volatility. By the third clip. My chest was tight. This one showed me in the living room. Phone pressed to my ear. Speaking to my therapist. The timestamp told me it had been recorded on a Tuesday morning when I was home alone. I remembered that session I'd been honest, vulnerable, talking about how the constant tension in the house was wearing me down. Hearing those words replayed without consent felt like a theft of something I couldn't get back. Another file opened to footage from my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulling my hair into a bun, completely unaware a camera was watching. The sight of myself in that private space sent a wave of nausea through me. Then came the bathroom, me brushing my teeth, adjusting my robe. The intimacy of those moments, stolen and stored, made my skin crawl. This wasn't petty cruelty. It was precise, intentional. Someone had planned this, curated it, and kept it hidden until the moment they could use it. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the laptop washing over my face, and felt the first flicker of something colder than fear settling in my chest. The next morning, I called Marissa, an old college friend who now worked as a paralegal for a well-known family law firm in Albany. I didn't tell her everything over the phone, just that I needed her professional opinion. We met that afternoon at a quiet cafe on State Street, the kind of place where the hum of espresso machines covered most conversations. I slid my laptop across the table and let her watch. She leaned in, her brow furrowing with every passing second. When she finally looked up, her voice was low. "Corinne, this isn't just creepy. If someone took this to court, they could argue you're emotionally unstable. They could make it look like you're unfit to parent." The words landed with a sharp clarity that made my stomach knot. "You mean, they could take Landon?" She nodded slowly, "Especially if they present these clips without the context. The bathroom and bedroom recordings, those would raise questions about legality, but most judges will see emotional outbursts or odd behavior first. And if the other side has influence or resources..." She let the sentence trail off. Suddenly, the micro camera in the bookshelf wasn't just an invasion, it was ammunition. My thoughts jumped back to last week. When my mother had been alone with Landon in the living room, I'd walked in just as she was smoothing his hair and saying, "You might live here more soon." Wouldn't that be nice at the time? I'd forced a smile, chalking it up to her usual overstepping. Now it felt like the first visible crack in a wall they'd been building for months. I sipped my coffee, though the taste barely registered. "If I can prove the footage is manipulated," I asked. Marissa tapped her pen against her notebook. "Then you've got leverage. But you need to gather everything, dates, times, any proof of tampering, and keep it somewhere they can't reach." As I left the cafe, the city air felt colder than it should have. I walked to my car with my bag hugged tight against me, the weight of the laptop suddenly heavy. They weren't just watching me, they were preparing to erase me from my own son's life. And if they were willing to go this far, I needed to be willing to go further. The next few days, I stopped moving through the house like a guest in someone else's life and started moving like a hunter. My phone stayed on voice memo mode whenever I was in shared spaces. I kept a small pen-sized recorder in my jacket pocket, switched on the moment I walked through the door. It didn't take long. One evening, while my mother and sister were in the kitchen, I lingered just out of sight in the hallway. My sister's voice, hushed but sharp, slipped through the doorway. "We need to provoke her. She has to snap, or none of this works." My mother's low murmur followed, but the words were clear enough agreement. Instructions. I pressed my hand to my coat, feeling the steady blink of the recorder as if it were my own heartbeat. Even Landon picked up on the shift. "Why is everyone whispering?" he asked one morning over cereal. I smiled for him. But inside, my resolve tightened. By Thursday, I had hours of audio casual digs, whispered strategy, my mother rehearsing lines about my forgetfulness as if she were practicing for a play. That afternoon, I took it all to the office of a lawyer Marissa had recommended. Her name was Evelyn Clark, a calm, sharp-eyed woman in her 40s whose desk was stacked with neat piles of case files. I handed her the micro SD card, the recordings, and the timeline I'd built from the last month. She listened to one clip, the corner of her mouth tightening. "This isn't just harassment," she said, leaning back. "It's targeted emotional abuse and illegal surveillance. We can use both criminal and civil routes, but you need to keep playing along for now. If they think you don't know, they'll keep getting sloppy." So I pretend nothing's changed. I asked, "Exactly." "We'll start with preserving evidence off-site backups. Encrypted storage. I'll file preliminary notices without revealing specifics. The more rope they give us, the better." Her precision steadied me. I left her office with a portable hard drive she insisted I keep at work, far from the house. That night, I made sure to laugh at dinner, to ask my sister about her job, to compliment my mother's cooking. I let them think they still had the upper hand. Inside, every cell in my body was vibrating with the need to move faster, to lock every door behind me, to get Landon somewhere safe. But I followed Evelyn's advice, because this wasn't about speed, it was about precision. And the more they underestimated me, the more I could see the cracks forming in their plan. By Saturday morning, I'd had enough of breathing the same air as people who wanted to dismantle my life. I packed a small overnight bag for Landon, no explanations. Just told him we were going to visit Aunt Rachel, a friend I trusted more than anyone. She lived 2 towns over, in a place where no one from my family had reason to go. We spent the day like nothing was wrong. Rachel made pancakes, Landon played with her golden retriever, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the weight of eyes on me. I left my phone on silent in my purse, deliberately out of reach. The quiet was addictive. It wasn't until late afternoon, when Landon was building a fort in Rachel's living room, that I finally checked it. The screen lit up with a wall of notifications, 129 missed calls. My mother's name filled most of them. My sister's right behind, and wedged between their numbers were calls from my ex-husband, who almost never reached out directly. I scrolled through the timestamps. The calls had started less than an hour after we left the house, each one a few minutes apart. There were also several voicemails, but I didn't press play. My hands had gone cold just holding the phone. It rang again in my palm. "Evelyn." I answered immediately. "They've either figured out you're gone," she said, her voice brisk, "or they noticed something missing. The files. Maybe. Whatever it is. They're scrambling. Don't go back tonight. Stay where you are. And don't answer their calls." I told her about the sheer number of times they'd tried to reach me. She exhaled sharply. "That's not panic over a misunderstanding, that's fear. They've lost control of something." I glanced over at Landon, who was draping a blanket over the back of a chair, his face lit with concentration. He had no idea that the same people who were blowing up my phone wanted him as a pawn in their game. I turned the phone off completely and set it face down on the counter. Whatever storm was brewing back at my mother's house, I wasn't stepping into it tonight. I needed time to decide exactly how I wanted the next move to play out. By Monday, I knew the only way to end this was to pull their performance into the light. I called my mother first, then my sister, my stepfather, even my ex-husband. I told each of them the same thing, that I wanted to put everything behind us, that I missed the sense of family we once had. My voice stayed even, warm. They all agreed to come. Hypocrisy was easier to arrange than honesty. I booked a small banquet room at the Maplewood Inn, a place neutral enough that no one could claim home court advantage. Then I called a tech specialist Evelyn recommended. He didn't flinch when I told him what I needed: a seamless presentation that would show the doctored footage side by side with the unedited originals. The kind of comparison that left no room for denial. We spent hours going through the files. He cropped, aligned, and timed each set so the truth would unspool with ruthless clarity, her voice feeding Landon lies. My sister whispering about provoking me. My ex laughing about winning custody. Every cut they'd made to twist reality was exposed. Evelyn prepared the other piece of the plan court documents showing my filings for invasion of privacy, emotional abuse, and custody protection. She also arranged for 2 process servers to be nearby the night of the dinner, ready to hand over legal papers if anyone tried to run. The day before the event, I stood in the empty banquet hall as staff set up round tables with crisp white linens. In the corner, the projector screen waited, rolled up like a curtain before a show. I could almost hear the clink of glasses, the rehearsed laughter, the false civility they'd bring with them. This wasn't about getting them to admit anything. It was about making sure that when the truth came out, they couldn't pretend they hadn't seen it. They arrived dressed for the part: polished smiles, careful greetings, voices pitched just loud enough for the room to hear. My mother hugged me like she'd never once tried to erase me. My sister complimented my dress. My ex shook my hand as if we were civil strangers. We ate in polite silence, broken by shallow conversation, each of them waiting for me to explain why I'd called them here. When dessert plates were cleared, I stood and thanked everyone for coming. I spoke slowly, the way you do when you're walking someone toward a cliff they can't see. Then I turned to the tech in the corner and nodded. The lights dimmed. The screen came to life. First, a clip of my sister sliding a tiny device into the hollow of a book on the den shelf. Then, my mother's voice, coaxing Landon in the living room. "If you tell the judge Mommy forgets things, you might get to live here more." Finally, my ex-husband on the phone. Chuckling to someone unseen, I'll push her until she loses custody. Then we get the house and the kid. Gasps rippled through the tables. My uncle set down his wine glass, muttered something under his breath, and walked out. My mother's smile faltered, her hands gripping the tablecloth. My sister's eyes darted toward the exit. My ex leaned back, jaw tight, as if daring me to say more. The reel kept playing, each clip matched to its untouched original, their manipulations laid bare. I didn't speak again. I let the silence do the work. Let them see themselves without the edits, without the excuses. When the screen went dark, no one moved. I picked up the court documents from my bag and began walking them to each table. The days after the dinner moved quickly. Evelyn filed motions, attached the video evidence, and within a week, the judge granted me a restraining order against my mother, sister, and ex-husband. Temporary full custody of Landon was awarded to me, with no unsupervised contact for any of them. We also moved forward with civil suits for invasion of privacy, emotional abuse, and unlawful surveillance. The ripple effect was immediate, in a town where everyone knew everyone's business. News spread fast. My mother's charity board quietly removed her name from its website. My sister's employer restructured her position out of existence. My ex-husband stopped showing up at the country club, his usual haunt, after whispers began following him from room to room. For the first time in months, I felt a measure of stillness in my home. Landon's laughter returned in small bursts over a board game. During a bedtime story, I let myself believe the worst was over. Then, 1 week later, I found it. A plain envelope slid through my mail slot. No return address? Inside was a single photograph me, asleep in my own bed, hair splayed across the pillow, the lamp still on from the night before. On the back, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "You still don't know what I'm capable of." The room seemed to tilt as I stared at it. This was no old image. The book on my nightstand, the glass of water beside it, they matched exactly how I'd left them hours earlier. Someone had been in my house. I closed the blinds, locked the doors, and called Evelyn. My voice didn't shake when I told her what had arrived, but inside, I could already feel the air shifting again, heavy with a threat I couldn't yet name. The police took the photo and envelope, their tone shifting when I pointed out the details, proving it was recent. Within days, they traced the intrusion to an associate of my sister, a man she'd met through her volunteer work, caught on a neighbor's security camera leaving my street in the early hours. He was arrested and charged with trespassing and stalking, and my sister faced new counts for conspiring with him. That was the final push I needed. Evelyn and I arranged a quick sale of the house, and within a month, Landon and I had moved to a small coastal town in New England. Our new home was modest, with wide windows that caught the morning light and the smell of salt water drifting in on the breeze. The quiet here feels different, earned, not borrowed. Landon rides his bike down safe streets, and I can read on the porch without glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. At night, I sleep with the windows open, the ocean's rhythm replacing the hum of my old fear. Looking back, I see the woman I was when this began, careful, hesitant, always adjusting herself to keep the peace. That version of me didn't survive. In her place is someone who knows her own strength, who understands that protecting what matters sometimes means preparing for a fight you hope never comes. Peace is fragile, but it's mine now, and if they ever come for me again, they'll find out exactly what I've become.